Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is about 11:34 on a Saturday morning. Hope everyone's doing good. Beautiful day so far. I think it's pretty cold out. Haven't been outside yet. So, yeah, I've been continuing with doing these videos. Again, I want to thank a lot of the new folks that have been joining this little circus that I call Film Fanatic, and people who've been subscribing to the page, to the channel, and all the folks that have been commenting. It's been really awesome. I try to always bring a diverse amount of movies to this channel. I'm a massive fan of movies, and so lately I've been covering some movies that I got from Santa Claus. We are a few days after Christmas, and I also did a big show yesterday on my overall, I would say, my most anticipated movie of the year, Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers. And so posted a big video on that. That movie was kind of an incredible experience. I really want to see it again. It's, a huge fan of Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula. I it's gotten me. I've read that book multiple times, and I just started reading it again, or actually listening to it, like a book on tape. I haven't done too much of getting into books that way, but I do love that format, so I've been revisiting that classic story, and it's just so damn good. So check out that review. It's been up, uploaded it yesterday. Definitely, I really want to see it again. Definitely an experience, and it's really, at its core, it's why I believe, going to the theater, it's the best way to experience. It's a work of art. So, and it's an art form. I hope never that never goes away. So, along with that, I got a bunch of movies around the holidays, around Christmas. Usually, when I go over my folks on Christmas, it didn't quite work out that way this year, but I still got a bunch of movies. Some I wasn't able to watch, but there were a few movies that I did get. So I've been bouncing back and forth with these shows as far as outside of going to see Nosferatu, which was such an amazing experience. I got a bunch of movies at Opera House Video, and then I also got some movies from Santa Claus. So I've been bouncing back between both of those collections. So very, very excited. I got a bunch of new Blu-rays this year for some movies that I really love. In a Violent Nature, which I think is easily one of the best horror films of 2024. We're getting really close to 2025. It's got some more movies in that regard to talk about and to watch. So, and then getting to some of these other movies that I did rent at Opera House Video. So today's show is going to be about Joker 2, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga. This came out like in October of this year. It was directed by Todd Phillips. And I did a show. Before I get into the movie, there's kind of a lot to talk about, I guess, with this movie. I kind of want to talk about the first film directed by Todd Phillips that came out. A little bit of Todd Phillips, some of his films and his career. He's been around for quite a few years. The strong reaction that Joker 2 got, as far as really, really bad reviews and really the negative press that it got for the most part, and how it just tanked in the box office. And also the first Joker. I saw that in the theater. I had really strong feelings with that movie. I believe I did a show on the Joker a while back. Pretty sure I have a show on that. Sometimes I lose track. If I didn't, this will kind of be that also, but it's going to be mainly focused, on Joker 2, and it came out in, I think it was October. It came out a little bit before Halloween, and it was a movie. When it was announced, that I was very, very excited about. There was a series of events that happened around it, leading up to it, to where I did lose a lot of enthusiasm on seeing it in the theater, and I did not go see it in the theater. So I've mentioned before, as far as comic book movies, my favorite superhero of all time is the Batman. I'm a huge fan. He's always been my go-to superhero, and the universe of Gotham City, the Rogues Gallery, all of the incredible villains that come along with it. And the Joker for me has always been the most iconic villain, definitely my favorite villain of all time. I love the complex nature of his being. He is an agent of chaos. Obviously, the most heralded and probably the most epic portrayal of this iconic villain was portrayed by Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight. Just a masterpiece of a film. And up until a few years ago, the Christopher Nolan films, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, I'm not a fan of The Dark Knight Rises. I felt like that movie was a tremendous letdown and very anticlimactic, and she's kind of a terrible conclusion to such a great world that was built. But up into to a few years ago, those were my favorite versions of the Batman. Obviously, grew up watching Tim Burton's incredible movie with Michael Keaton, but I really thought they nailed his character, this masked vigilante, and especially with what they did with the Joker. The villain that I am in love with the most. To me, he is just just a source of inspiration in a weird way. So, but as well as the Batman. But it wasn't until when Matt Reeves put out, about 3 years ago now, I believe. Matt Reeves directed a newer version of the Batman, a more contemporary version of the Batman with Robert Patterson. That movie for me is my favorite Batman movie of all time. I just feel they really captured the grittiness, the entire world, the whole dark aesthetic. I have always been a big fan of the detective side of Batman, and I felt they really focused on that a lot more, and they really built up that tension. So that for me, again, those other films I mentioned are fantastic, of course, and I will always revisit them. I'll always love them. But I've always thought that the portrayal by Robert Patterson, I just feel like that movie is, for me, the definitive telling of his character. Definitely my favorite version of the Batman. So I was very excited to see, I did see the Joker when it came out, starring Joaquin Phoenix. It, was a global phenomenon. It came out, it was the biggest R-rated movie ever. It made something like $1 billion. Joaquin Phoenix went on to win Best Actor for that film. I saw that movie in the theater. It was a movie that I was very, very excited about. And I really loved that film when it came out. I loved how they did something so different, and the incredibly, insanely daunting task of trying to do something different on the heels of what Heath Ledger established with this iconic villain. And of course, I can't leave out Jack Nicholson's portrayal of the Joker. Another, incredible performance. But Heath Ledger took it to a whole nother level. So the daunting task of trying to do something new with this amazing character, starring Joaquin Phoenix, I was like, this seems like a situation of I don't know, a series of impossible odds that are stacked against you or the filmmakers. Now, how can they do that? How can they, give you something new or be a contender? So, but I thought what they did with the film was really unique, and I really loved it. It was really tragic. It was kind of a tale about mental illness. They came at it from a different angle. I thought it was really interesting, really innovative, really dark. They really got into the psychology of someone slowly losing their mind and hallucinating and all of those things that come along with mental illness. And I thought they did a really fantastic version of that, of that portrayal. And I thought the performance itself from Joaquin Phoenix was kind of a breath of fresh air. They did something really different. It it was its own thing, and I thought he did a fantastic job, and I thought he deserved the praise that he got, and he ended up winning Best Actor for his portrayal of the Joker, as well as Heath Ledger for The Dark Knight. Unfortunately, he passed away, which was a really tragic loss. So I really loved that film, The Joker, when it came out, and I was a big fan of it. And I had seen it. I think I saw it. I've seen it. I haven't seen it a lot. I saw it the one time in the theater, and I saw it maybe at least twice since then on where I rented it on DVD. Always really loved that film. And during the time when I got into that film, I started to, I'm a big film kind of researcher. If I get into a film, I like to find out about how this movie was made, the influences. I love to search out interviews with the filmmakers. Just seeing what made this thing come together. What were all those pieces? And during that time, I started seeing lots of interviews with Todd Fields, the director, and Joaquin Phoenix, and they were talking a lot about the huge influence that the films of Martin Scorsese, the films that were directed by Martin Scorsese, how they had a really big influence on the Joker. And he also, I believe, Martin Scorsese actually produced this film, and Robert De Niro was actually in that as well. And I felt with Robert De Niro's career, I thought it was one of his best performances in recent years by far. So I was really curious about that, and it made sense because I felt the Joker had this grittiness to it. It did have this rawness to it. It was, a crime movie. It had that Scorsese flavor to it. I felt like it was just a gritty drama. It was dark. It was very violent, pretty gloomy, and it reminded me of old school Scorsese films, particularly like say Taxi Driver or Mean Streets. It just had that dirtiness to it, which for me, are just incredible movies. Mean Streets being my favorite film of his. So I, in my time of like checking out, about what their influences were for going into this film, like seeing lots of interviews with Todd Fields, the director, he was talking about being a huge Scorsese fan, and he kept talking about one film in particular called the King of Comedy, which was a movie directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro. And for some crazy reason, I never got a chance to see the King of Comedy. It was a movie I had always heard about. It was kind of on the sidelines for me, but I had never seen it, and I was like, why haven't I ever seen this movie? And Scorsese really is one of my favorite directors. I love his films. I think he's one of the most important American directors. He's still doing amazing work. His last film, Killers of the Flower Moon, which is an amazing film. I did see that in the theater. He's got such a longevity as a director. He's in his 80s, and he has so many consistently fantastic films. so many iconic films. He still has that passion and energy that he brings every time. But for some reason, I never saw King of Comedy. So at Opera House Video, I noticed that they had recently gotten that film in on DVD. So I was really excited. So I rented The King of Comedy. My first time seeing it, finally getting a chance to watch it, and I was blown away by it. It's an incredible film. Robert De Niro's performance in it is just amazing. Jerry Lewis is in this film. It, I guess, and again, it was my first time seeing this movie. I had heard about it for years, and I finally watched it. Totally blown away by it. I guess it had come out a couple of years after Scorsese had put out Taxi Driver, which is one of my favorite Scorsese films of all time, starring Robert De Niro, of course. And I was just blown away by it. I just thought that this was incredible. And the reason I made myself finally watch The King of Comedy was because I saw it come up in all of these interviews I was watching with Todd Phillips, the director, where he was saying that that film, all of Scorsese's work was a big influence on this film, or inspiration. But it was that film in particular that really was the key to him making this new version of the Joker. They, really, as far as shaping the world, the tone, all of those things, the script. So, but the thing that I was, well, actually, I should say, after I finished watching The King of Comedy, and I've only seen it once. I do want to get it on Blu-ray at some point. My jaw dropped, and not for the reasons that you would think. I thought it was an incredible movie. I was blown away by the movie itself and how just incredible it was. But what I thought was so weird was that the Joker, I felt when I first saw the Joker, I thought it was really fresh. I thought it was innovative. It was truly a standalone film. It was giving you something new. It was a real fresh approach to this character. It was even, a series of where they were tackling a subject matter being mental illness that I felt had never really been really portrayed like that before, or like this before. I thought it was totally innovative. And then after I saw The King of Comedy, I was like, no, this movie, The King of Comedy, was not an influence on the Joker. Todd Phillips, I felt, just literally ripped this movie off in every way. And I was like, suddenly the high value that I had for the Joker was severely lowered, and I didn't hold the Joker in high regard like I did before, not even close. I still thought it was a good movie, but I'm like, my first reaction was like, literally, like, what the fuck? This literally is the same movie. It went beyond the idea of, oh, it's an influence, or it's a, they took a lot of ideas from it. No, I just felt they took the template that was established by Scorsese for that film and copied and pasted. And I was just like, what the fuck? And I was kind of flabbergasted. And suddenly this movie that I thought was so fresh and unique and innovative wasn't that. It was literally just a ripoff of a movie that had come out 20 years before. And, I'm all about exploitation movies. And in the world of the sleazy exploitation genre, that's an obvious, big time trope of what an exploitation movie is. But it's an entirely different way, and it's an entirely different way of telling a story. Those movies are kind of passion projects. They're made to make money. They are super low budget. They're really cheesy. They're terrible. they're sleazy, and it's an entirely separate kind of genre. And those films can be so bad, even when they intimidate when they rip off another film. They have their own charm to them. For me, it's a great, perfect example for me when I look at the exploitation world and what the business is of exploitation. You take Steven Spielberg's Jaws, right, which is an incredible film, masterpiece of a film. And then you take another film that is a direct ripoff of that, The Car, which is one of my favorite exploitation movies of all time. It's obvious what they did with that movie, but it's got its own unique thing. It's got its own charm. It's got it's got its big time flaws, but at the end, it's the case if it's so bad it's good. But it's got its own charm. It's got its own humor, levity to the story. And in that context, I feel like it totally works. But the Joker is a relatively big budget Hollywood film, and this isn't set out at all in the world. It's set in a completely different aesthetic, in a completely different world. So it doesn't really, for me, I separate those two things. So I was like, I was just flabbergasted, and I was just blown away by it. And since then, I haven't seen the Joker, and it really has let the air out of the balloon as far as my enthusiasm for that film, because it wasn't just an influence. It literally is a ripoff. And because the King of Comedy is essentially about, where Robert De Niro's character, it's a study on this, struggling comedian who is, suffering from like schizophrenia or some severe mental illness, and it's a portrayal of somebody losing his mind, and you're not really sure where his reality is, and you see that he is not sure of his his place in any way in this crazy world that he is living in. And it's exactly the same exact film. Robert De Niro's character in The King of Comedy is the Joker, literally, played by Joaquin Phoenix. The storyline, the narrative, the the way the tone is of the film, the the dream the more or less the dream sequences, right, toting that line between reality and fantasy, getting lost in the fantasy world, the darkness, the sense of doom, all of those things. And that being said, I still thought it's a good movie, but at one time I thought it was kind of a masterpiece and an incredible film. But after seeing The King of Comedy, it's diminished greatly, and now I don't think of it as a masterpiece anymore. I think of it as being a good movie. So it's really like it went from here to here for me. And I've said this to lots of people, when it's come up where I'll talk to somebody about the Joker. I've told multiple people over the last few years about that experience and how just incredibly strange it was, and the feeling of, wow, this movie isn't. I don't hold this film, The Joker, on this high pedestal anymore because of that reason. So very, very weird. And then so a few years ago, it was announced that they were going to make Joker 2. And I was like excited, but then as things came out more and more about it, they were saying that they were going to make this, it was going to be a musical, and that Lady Gaga was going to be playing Harley Quinn. And I'm not a huge fan of musicals, to be honest. I really, there are really good, obviously, Fred Astaire singing in the rain, The Sound of Music. There are iconic films done in that genre that are, very well done, that are masterworks in that respective genre. So I understand that, and I can give that praise, give those films praise. My own personal taste, I'm just not a big fan of the genre. I just feel like I'd rather just hear a really, really good story, or see a great story be told without all the singing and dancing. That's the dumbest way or the simplest way I can explain it. But I'm willing to give it a shot. I try to have an open mind. And so when the Joker 2 came out, again, I think it came out in like October, or I should say right before it came out, it got some really horrendously bad reviews. Really bad reviews where people were saying that they were just baffled on how bad this film was, that it just totally was I guess like an epic fail in every possible way. It was. I just saw numerous reviews for it that basically tore this movie to shreds, and I saw lots of people who had seen the movie also saying that this movie was, you know, uh, a whole like a whole new definition of the term, like a giant misfire. Like it just totally went off the tracks. The train went off. Train left the station and then just crashed and burned and became a fireball. Just really bad. And it came out and it bombed. It bombed. It set records just on how badly it did in the box office, which is insane because you think of the first one, the first Joker, where it made like something like $1 billion. It was the biggest. I think Deadpool Wolverine surpassed it, but at the time, the Joker was the biggest rated R film in history as far as box office, and it was a phenomenon. I remember it was like this massive, massive thing when it came out. And so when the Joker 2 came out, that it made absolute shit in the box office, and it bombed, totally bombed. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. All of this investment in time, and coming off the heels of something that was so heralded and praised. Like what the hell's going on, And again, you can't always buy into what critics say. You got to make up your own mind. You got to, you can't always, a lot of the times everybody thinks now that they are a film critic, and so people can voice their opinions and blah blah blah, and they can create this shitstorm. Case in point for me was Halloween Ends, where people just totally shit on that movie left and right across the board. I mean, it was just insane when that movie came out because that movie bombed awful. Like, just, was in the toilet bowl the minute it came out. And it was so, like, so bad that I ended up seeing that film in the theater, and I actually really liked that movie. And for me, it followed the same trajectory as Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, which is one of my all time favorite exploitation horror movies of all time. I love that movie to death. For me, it followed the same trajectory as that because that film also was just, raped by critics and bombed in the box office, and it's gone on to become a cult favorite, And I saw the trajectory between that and Halloween Ends. I felt it was kind of riding that same path, and people, now that a few years have gone by, people are starting to come back to that movie. So you got to take it with a grain of salt, and you got to like, make up your own mind. You got to see the shit for yourself. So I just over Christmas holiday, I rented a bunch of movies, and one of the movies I got was The Joker 2. Going into this movie, one of the things that I thought was interesting and maybe a cool thing or a great thing, but then I started thinking maybe that's a terrible thing, one of the things I heard was that the studio that put out the Joker, the first one, basically gave the keys to the kingdom to Todd Phillips, the director for the sequel. They basically said they gave him all the money in the world, and they're like, okay, do whatever the fuck you want to do. There's no strings attached. There's not going to be any other cooks in the kitchen. It's just you, you know, which is kind of, crazy. There's not, usually, a filmmaker does not have a situation that he falls into where there's no restraints. He can just do whatever he wants. That can be amazing and that's wonderful, but there has to be also, to a point, because that can get, you know, I can see that being, I could see that becoming or going into an extreme. That can really go badly because it can go so far the other way where suddenly there isn't anybody bringing their opinions to the table and saying, well, I don't know, maybe you should pull back a little bit. Uh, a great example of that for me, of where that did happen, of where the director was given everything because he had a lot of success. Ari Aster did that, who is a really great director, but that happened with him after the success of Hereditary and Midsummer. He did a film recently with Joaquin Phoenix and all of his films came out on A24, the kind of the indie hipster film studio that's been putting out a lot of these so-called elevated art house horror films. There was a film that he did last year with Joaquin Phoenix, which I can't remember the name of. He directed Beau is Afraid with Joaquin Phoenix, and A24 essentially did the same thing, where they were like, you're a moneymaker, you're the best guy we have. Do what you want to do, and we'll give you all the money, the resources, and everything. And so he put out Beau is Afraid with Joaquin Phoenix, and that movie is, uh, man, that movie was such a letdown, and it came out about a year ago, and it was just one giant migraine headache, and I could not even get into that movie. I couldn't finish it. So that's an example of where, okay, someone's gotta be in the kitchen as well with the head chef to be like, okay, time to reel it in. You can't crawl too far up your own ass. There's gotta be some second opinions in this. So I was skeptical when I saw the Joker too, because I thought it could go. There's two extremes. It could go either way. And so I watched it the other night, the Joker 2, and I thought, okay, it's starting out really cool. I felt the vibe of this movie is there was some beautiful cinematography right in the beginning. It felt really gritty, and it was like going to be this really gritty, kind of dirty prison movie. And I thought, okay, this is cool. The first 5 or 10 minutes, I was like, wow, okay, this is interesting. The other thing that's really cool about the beginning of this movie is there is this animation that is really awesome that I did not expect. And I was like, that's really cool, and I love this. This is cool. But once it got into, and there's not very much dialogue, but once it got into the scenes of where there's actually dialogue and you're being introduced to these characters, I was dumbfounded on how terrible the writing was. And the movie evolved to where it became. I was describing it the other day when I went into Opera House Video and I returned the movie. I was talking to Dennis Howard. Overall, this movie felt like a shelved, unaired, pretty bad Law and Order courtroom drama episode. It's essentially just a really straightforward, run of the mill courtroom drama show that you would see. It felt like the tone of it. It started out like you're seeing a movie and it's going to be an experience, and then it became. It felt like, wow, I'm just watching a totally run of the mill, boring ass courtroom drama TV show, and there was no levity to it. There was no depth to it, and the writing was just juvenile. And I'm like, did a 15-year-old kid write the dialogue for this? Because it was so predictable. It was so generic. And it was just like this rehash of what happened in the first movie. The information that they were talking about that you're getting in the second one was just a recap of all of the events that happened in the first one. There was nothing new. There was no new perspectives. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Like, it was so frustrating. And it was such the writing was just so bad, and even the acting was. It just felt like things were so off. Like nothing had its bearings to it. It felt like everything was was about to just collapse. And this movie is a musical, and I have to say the musical aspects of this movie are it's atrocious. Atrocious. It's a The musical numbers are just so terribly orchestrated and put together. There's not even really any choreography put into these pieces. Like, it felt like these this aspect of the movie, the musical aspect, there wasn't any real thought put into it. And the thing that made it even worse is Joaquin Phoenix's singing voice. His singing in this film is just so bad, so terrible. And he sings his own pieces in this, or these are cover songs, old standards from like the 20s, and there are songs from the real book and public domain jazz standards, if you will, show tunes, and they are it's cringeworthy. It really is. It's so incredibly hard to get through. I couldn't believe it. Even Lady Gaga's performance in this movie is so it feels so forced and so like cliche, and like even her singing numbers are just so bad, and I'm like, I was just totally fucking baffled by this movie, and I got about 15 minutes into this movie, and it made my head hurt, and I had to take it out because it was painful. And I was like, this movie is a giant shit stain. I'm like, what the fuck were they thinking? Like putting this movie out. Like, I have no idea what I have no idea what they were thinking. I have no idea what the people in the camp making this movie were thinking. Yeah, I just it's the most it's the biggest example I've seen of just something that can go so terribly wrong in every way possible. And I think that this movie is probably the worst movie I've seen this year. Like, and again, all of the negative things I heard about this movie were true. Yeah, it's a painful experience, and I would say don't even stream this movie. It's a total fucking clusterfuck, and yeah, it's the worst movie I've seen this year, and it's unwatchable, frankly. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the fuck they were thinking. So just stay away. Don't waste your fucking time. There's plenty of other things you can do with your time. So anyway, have a great day. Peace.